slack. So I've got a principle I want to give you. I call this increasing generational faithfulness. Increasing generational faithfulness. Let me explain what I mean by this. There's a tension between what Mary and Joseph righteously want for their son. Their expectations of their child are not to go missing for 3 days. But Jesus has some expectations of his own, and they're righteous too. And they create a tension. They create a logjam. They create some conflict and some fights. Oh yes, fights in the first family. Arguments, disagreements, misunderstandings. Oh my, really? You mean they didn't have a perfect relationship? No, they did not. So parents, even if you were to have a perfect child, you wouldn't be able to have a perfect relationship with that child. Increasing generational faithfulness. How do we measure when a child becomes an adult? How do we know when a boy becomes a man and a girl becomes a woman? In our society, wrongly, I think we measure that by, well, what can they legally do? Can they legally buy cigarettes? Can they legally drive a car? Can they legally drink alcohol? Can they legally vote? Can they legally get married? Can they legally do some other things that I won't mention here today? It's all about what's legal. What's right? It's like we measure, at some point, the child's rights outweigh the parent's rights, and at that point, they're no longer a child, they're an adult, and they can be emancipated. They can divorce their parents and move on with their life or whatever. I wonder what it would be like if instead of measuring adulthood and where childhood leaves off by what they're rightfully able to do under the Constitution, what if it was measured by their righteousness before God, and that you're not really an adult until you're at least as grown up as your parents and maybe more so? Did you hear that? What would it be like if their rights under God were the measuring stick? What if we measured when a child becomes an adult the way they used to in the Bible, based on when they can take the obligations of the covenant on their shoulders themselves? What if we measured it by whatever you accomplished as a parent, that they don't get to be an adult until they've at least met the burden of your maturity? Ooh, that sword cuts both ways. I'm not sure I like that one. Increasing generational faithfulness. See, it's not just enough to be like your parents. Are you hearing me? It's not enough to just duplicate what your parents did. You're required to do more. And so am I. Okay, so here's a double dip for you. Another movie, another book. John Grisham wrote a book called A Time to Kill, and there's a lawyer in there named Jake Brigance, and he gets the case of his life, and he keeps going to see his mentor, Lucian Wilbank. And Lucian is sort of a disgraced lawyer that was a teacher and did something wrong and was disbarred, but he still loves his teacher a lot, so he goes to ask him for advice all the time. And he's kind of this drunk that lives on a plantation someplace in Mississippi, and so he's always walking around with a drink in his hand, kind of comfortably numb. And he goes to see him, and he says, I want to be just like you. What would you do if you were in my situation? How would you handle this case? And he says, no, Jake. Wrong question. Don't be like me. You got to be better than me. I was called to be a preacher when I was a little boy. I was probably only 3 or 4 years old the first time I knew that God was calling me to do it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't understand what it would mean to do it, but I knew that he was calling me to do this. It took a long time for me to surrender to do this. And I remember one time several years ago, somebody came to me and they said, who knows me and my father, and they said, Toby, you're a better preacher than your dad. And my response was, I better be. I'm standing on his shoulders. I hope one day when my son grows up and becomes a preacher, that he's able to say the same thing. Increasing generational faithfulness. It's not enough to just do what your parents did. You got to do better than they did. Jesus did. Will you?